Hexagram 14, possession in great measure. And to add another layer to this exploration, we're looking at it through the lens of Jordan's work, which I find fascinating.
Oh yeah, he's got some really interesting perspectives.
He does. So get this. He suggests that letting go of your own happiness might actually be the key to experiencing more joy, peace, and love. What do you think about that?
At first glance, it sounds a little counterintuitive.
Right. It kind of goes against everything we're usually told.
It does. But when you really start to dig into his 3 levels of consciousness, it starts to make sense.
Okay, so let's unpack these 3 levels. What's the first one all about?
The first level is what he calls prioritizing personal happiness. PPH for short.
PPH. Okay.
Yeah.
So is that like what most of us are doing most of the time?
I'd say so. Yeah, it's that constant search for happiness, always looking for the next thing that we think will make us happy. A new car, a bigger house, a promotion.
I think we can all relate to that. It's like we're on this never-ending treadmill, always chasing after the next thing.
Exactly. And it's not that those things are inherently bad. It's just the belief that our happiness depends on them. That if I just get this, then I'll finally be happy kind of thinking.
Right, like happiness is this destination that we have to reach.
Yeah, and Jordan uses these great acronyms to describe the thought patterns and behaviors that keep us stuck at this level. SAD stands for suppress, agree, disagree. Think about a time when you really, really wanted something.
Good.
Did you maybe suppress any doubts you had about whether or not it would actually make you happy?
Oh, yeah.
Did you maybe agree with anyone who told you to go for it? Even if deep down you weren't really sure? Or did you disagree with anyone who questioned your desire?
Oh, yeah. All of those things.
That's SAD in action.
Okay. And what about GAG?
GAG stands for grip and grasp. And it's all about how tightly we hold on to our desires.
Like white-knuckling it.
Yeah, like clinging to that desire, being afraid to let it go, even if it's causing us stress or maybe even leading us down a path that doesn't feel quite right.
Okay, so SAD and GAG, not the most pleasant states of mind to be in.
No, not at all.
And they certainly don't sound like they lead to possession in great measure, which is what this hexagram is all about, right?
Right, and I think that's where a lot of the misinterpretation comes in. We think possession in great measure means having a ton of stuff, but that's a very level 1 way of looking at it.
So we're missing the deeper meaning.
Exactly.
We're so focused on getting more instead of appreciating the abundance that's already present within us and around us.
That's a great way to put it.
So what happens then? We end up feeling even more empty and unfulfilled, even when we get what we want. So how do we break free from this cycle of sadness and gagging?
That's where level 2 comes in.
Okay, so tell us more about level 2.
Level 2 is all about equanimity.
Equanimity, okay. So does that mean, like, giving up all our desires?
Not necessarily. It's more about making peace with that part of ourselves that's always seeking, always searching.
Okay, so befriending our inner striver instead of trying to shut it down.
Exactly. Yeah, it's more like recognizing that those desires are just like waves in the ocean, They come and go, they're a natural part of life, but you don't have to let them completely toss you around.
That's a good analogy.
Jordan talks about this idea of a latency period. It happens right after we get something we've been wanting. It's like this little pause, this moment of stillness before the attachment sets in, before we start, gripping and grasping.
Oh, I get it. Like when you unwrap a present and for a split second, you're just in awe, and then suddenly you start thinking about where you're going to put it or how you're going to use it.
Exactly. And in that moment, Jordan says we have this opportunity to connect with what he calls our true self, or the undifferentiated field of awareness. It's like a glimpse of this deeper level of being that's beyond that constant striving.
Wow, that's pretty deep. So level 2 is about learning to access that peaceful space more often, not getting swept away by those waves of desire.
Exactly. And as you become more comfortable with this equanimity, you start to see through some of the masks that you've been wearing, the roles you've been playing, trying to find happiness.
Like the masks we wear in our relationship.
Yeah. You're less attached to needing to be the hero or the victim or the perfect person.
It's like you're letting go of the drama.
Exactly. And that leads us to level 3, which he calls wishing happiness for others, or WHO.
WHO. Okay, now this is where I think things get really challenging. It's one thing to try and manage my own desires, but to genuinely wish happiness for others without, needing anything in return. That sounds almost impossible.
I can understand why you would say that. It is a challenging practice, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And it's important to be clear about what WHO actually means. It's not about rushing to fix other people's problems or giving them things that you think they need.
So it's not about being a rescuer or a people pleaser.
No, not at all. It's about genuinely wishing for others, the kind of deep, lasting happiness that we experience at those upper levels, that sense of joy and peace that's not dependent on external conditions.
This is about recognizing that everyone deep down is looking for that same sense of fulfillment, even if they're going about it in ways that aren't so effective.
Yeah. There's this beautiful quote from Shantideva. He says, "All happiness in this world arises from wishing others to be happy. All suffering arises from wishing oneself to be happy."
Wow, that is powerful. But if we're stuck in that level one mentality, that constant seeking of our own happiness, how can we even begin to shift to this place of WHO?
You're right. You can't just jump from level 1 to level 3.
You got to go through the steps.
You do. That's why Jordan emphasizes the importance of working through those PPH tendencies first, making peace with that part of ourselves that's always grasping and clinging.
So it's about untangling ourselves from our own self-centeredness before we can really connect with others in a genuine way.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so where does Jordan's concept of START fit into all of this?
So START is this acronym that he uses to describe the different aspects of our being that we need to embrace in order to really move towards this state of WHO.
Okay, break that down for us. What does START stand for?
It stands for surprise, transformation, acceptance, restoration, and tradition.
Okay, so it's about accepting all parts of ourselves, even the parts that seem kind of contradictory.
Exactly. We all have these parts of us that crave novelty and surprise, parts that long for transformation, parts that just need rest and restoration, and sometimes we even find comfort in tradition and repetition. At level 1, we're constantly trying to manipulate our experience to satisfy these desires, but START is about recognizing that these parts exist and welcoming them without judgment.
I see. And how does this relate back to possession in great measure? It seems like we're kind of moving away from the idea of possession altogether. So possession in great measure becomes about possessing a wider range of experiences, ways of being.
Exactly. And with this expanded sense of possession, we also gain a profound sense of freedom.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all ties together, but I'm still a little fuzzy on how letting go of personal happiness actually leads to more happiness. Help me connect those dots.
Sure, it does seem counterintuitive, but when we're constantly striving for our own happiness, we're often stressed, anxious, and focused on what we lack. And that creates this tension that actually prevents us from experiencing the joy that's already present.
It's like we're gripping so tightly to the idea of happiness that we squeeze all the joy out of life.
That's a great way to put it. When we let go of that striving, when we relax into the present moment and open ourselves to the possibility of happiness for others, something shifts.
What happens?
We create space for happiness to flow in. We start to notice all the good that's already around us, and we experience a sense of joy and peace that's not dependent on external circumstances.
So it's like by releasing our grip on personal happiness, we're actually opening ourselves up to a deeper, more sustainable kind of joy.
Precisely. And this is where Jordan's idea of freedom, joy, peace, love, or JPL comes in. It's not something that we achieve by chasing after it. It emerges naturally when we let go of the need to control.
So JPL is like a byproduct of this shift in consciousness, not the goal itself.
Exactly. At level 3, we find this sense of balance and support. We're no longer possessed by desires or aversions or this need to micromanage every aspect of our lives.
It's like we're stepping out of the driver's seat and trusting that things are going to unfold as they should. But doesn't that sound a little bit passive, like giving up?
It's not about being passive. It's about shifting our perspective, from I need to make this happen to I'm open to what life brings. It's recognizing that we're not in control of everything, and that's okay.
So it's more about surrendering to the flow of life rather than trying to force things to go our way.
Yeah, and when we do that, we create space for something much greater to emerge. We connect with our true selves. We find a sense of peace and joy that doesn't depend on external conditions.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
But I got to be honest, the idea of wishing happiness for others without needing anything in return still feels kind of idealistic to me. Is that really possible?
It is definitely a practice. It's not always easy, but it's much more accessible when we remember that we're all interconnected. Our well-being is tied to the well-being of others.
Oh, that's a good point.
When we genuinely wish happiness for others, we're not just doing something nice for them, we're cultivating inner peace and joy for ourselves, too.
It's like a ripple effect.
Exactly.
Our positive intentions create a more harmonious environment for everyone.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that practicing WHO doesn't mean we ignore our own needs or let people walk all over us. It's about finding that balance between self-care and compassion.
So healthy boundaries.
Yeah,
Yeah.
setting healthy boundaries while still holding space for others' happiness.
This is making a lot of sense, but how do we actually cultivate this level 3 consciousness?
Yeah.
It can't be easy to go from prioritizing personal happiness to genuinely wishing happiness for others.
It's an ongoing practice. There are a lot of techniques and tools that Jordan offers in his book, but one of the most important things is simply becoming aware of our thoughts, our motivations.
Mindfulness.
Yeah. Paying attention to those moments when we get caught up in PPH.
Noticing when we're grasping and resisting.
Exactly. And then gently reminding ourselves that there's another way. That we can let go of that struggle, open our hearts, and experience the freedom and joy that come with wishing others well.
It sounds like a simple shift, but I can already sense how powerful it could be.
It is. And the more we practice it, the more natural it becomes. It's like rewiring our brains for happiness.
I love that. This has been such an insightful deep dive. I'm already feeling inspired to start incorporating some of these ideas into my own life.
I love to hear that.
Before we wrap things up, is there anything else about Jordan's work, specifically on this hexagram, on these 3 levels, that you want to highlight?
One thing that I find particularly interesting is how Jordan connects this to the imagery of hexagram 14 itself. How it represents a state of abundance where we have everything we need, but we block ourselves from accessing that abundance because we're so focused on getting more, chasing those external things that we think will make us happy.
Right. So the hexagram itself is like this reminder that true wealth lies within us.
Exactly. And that ultimately level 3 is all about tapping into that inner wellspring of joy, that peace, and letting it flow outward, wishing that same happiness for everyone we encounter.
Beautiful. I'm definitely going to be spending some time reflecting on that.
Me too.
Something to think about, as you move through the rest of your day. What would it be like to approach your interactions today from a place of WHO, genuinely wishing happiness for others? Just notice how that subtle shift in intention might impact your experiences, the energy you bring to the world.
It's a great question.
As we've been talking about these levels and Jordan's ideas about happiness, I keep coming back to the name of hexagram 14, possession in great measure. It just seems like such a, loaded phrase, especially in light of everything we've been discussing.
It is. It really is. And it's so interesting how Jordan connects this whole concept of possession in great measure to these different levels of consciousness.
Okay, yeah. Help me connect those dots. How does this hexagram relate to the idea of letting go of your own personal happiness? Seems almost counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, a bit paradoxical, isn't it? But I think that's where the real depth lies. At level 1, we tend to interpret possession in great measure in a very, materialistic way. We think it means we need to, accumulate all this stuff, possessions, achievements, status. That's the key to happiness.
Right. The more we have, the happier we'll be.
Exactly. And as we've been talking about, that kind of thinking just leads to more sadness and gagging. We become possessed by the very things that we're trying to possess.
And we end up feeling empty and dissatisfied.
Exactly.
But Jordan is suggesting that true possession in great measure is something much, much deeper, right?
Exactly. As we move towards those upper levels, level 2 and level 3, we start to understand that true possession isn't about external things. It's about the qualities of our own being.
So it's about cultivating those qualities, like
Oh.
inner peace, compassion, generosity.
Exactly. It's about that ability to genuinely wish happiness for others.
So we're shifting from possessing things to possessing qualities.
That's a great way to put it. And those qualities, they're not, limited. They're not finite. They're things that we can cultivate and share without ever depleting them.
It's interesting. This reminds me of what we were talking about earlier, about how letting go of personal happiness can actually lead to more happiness.
Yeah.
It's like by releasing that grip, that need for things to be a certain way, we open ourselves up to a whole new level of abundance.
It is a beautiful paradox, isn't it? When we stop clinging so tightly to this idea of happiness as something that we have to acquire or control, it starts to flow into our lives in these unexpected ways.
Yeah. So practicing WHO becomes a way of embodying possession in great measure. We possess that capacity to bring happiness to others. And in doing so, we experience a deep sense of fulfillment ourselves.
That is a powerful insight, and I think it really speaks to the transformative potential of this hexagram. It's a reminder that true wealth lies not in what we have, but in who we are and how we choose to connect with the world around us.
This has been such an enriching deep dive. I feel like we've uncovered so many layers of meaning in Hexagram 14, and I love Jordan's framework of these 3 levels. It's given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
And I think a key takeaway here is that true happiness is not something we chase after, but something we cultivate from within.
Yep.
It's a state of being. It arises from, letting go of our need to control, embracing the present moment, and genuinely wishing happiness for others.
Absolutely.
It's a profound message. So as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave our listeners with one final question, something to carry with them. What would it look like to embody that spirit of possession in great measure in your own life? How can you cultivate that sense of abundance that's not based on external things, but on the qualities of your heart and mind?
That's a beautiful invitation to our listeners.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another exploration of wisdom and insight. Until then, may you find joy in the journey and discover the true meaning of possession in great measure.